We're now going to hear from Valerie Pelletier. Pelletier is from Canada. She's a survivor of prostitution, and she's going to talk, she's an artist and a militant, and also goes by the name Legal Tender. She's a singer and a street musician and contributes regularly to radical feminist discussions in interview or in print.
I'm going to be speaking about the very surreal situation I found myself in, where I was working in a women resource and I lost my job to gender identity ideology. So if I set the table first, I guess what makes my story even more outrageous is the fact that from my previous life experience, I am exactly the kind of woman that this resource would have been helping 10, 20 years ago. And now I'm in a place of giving back, of dealing with my trauma and really wanting to help women escape the sex industry. And so I made a choice to only work in nonprofit. For the last 12, 15 years, I've pretty much only worked for nonprofit, which usually means accepting lower pays in order to do something that fits with your values. But these are where my priorities are. And at this point where I had this job, I was actually not working as a counselor because I needed a break from the mental load. I had a relapse of PTSD symptom from having an armed robbery happen to me about 4 years ago. And so feeling still vulnerable and not wanting to take on such heaviness, I was in kind of like taking care of myself mode, where I decided to do what I do is to kind of go back to like cleaning jobs, or the kind of job where you don't have any mental load and you're very physical. And so I found this job in a community agency where I was working in the donations department. So I was receiving the donation, deciding what's good to keep or to reuse, cleaning it, making it reusable. And so I actually love that job because you're working in a warehouse. It's like you're super busy. You got truckloads of stuff coming in all the time. The music is playing, and you receive teams of volunteers where you're like team working, and it's very dynamic. So it was really what I needed at the time. What needs to be clear is that in my job, I had no incidents on anyone in the organization. I was really in the basement working in stocking donation. I didn't have a say. I was not working as a counselor with the women using the resource. So basically my political views had no incidence on the organization. And so basically what happened is I had been working there for about 9 months when suddenly I get called into the HR office, and the men working at the HR, and that's something else I would like to point out, that more and more you have a lot of men in deciding position working in women agency. I mean, they are allowed to do what they want, but I am allowed to voice my reservation. So also the reason why I didn't end up in his job with his diplomas is because I had the life I had. So, hello. And so basically I get called into his office, and within 25 minutes, I was fired. And he tells me he's received some screen captures of my activism that I do online on social media, that someone, one or more person had reported me to my workplace as a transphobic person, and putting pressure on my agency, on my community agency, that basically it's unacceptable of them to employ such a transphobic person. And they caved in really fast. The words "you're transphobic" were used. The expression "trans women are women" were used and confirmed to me as a statement that they abide by, which again, they are technically speaking allowed to do that. But my dissension was happening outside of work in my private life, where I am gender critical, and my posts are about that, and my intervention on various feminist forums are about that, and I am allowed. This is protected by law. This is my right to consciousness, to free speech in my own life. And again, my political position had no incidence on the inner working of the agency, or even on the clientele with whom I was barely in contact with. I could just maybe meet them, but I was not working in the housing part of the resource. So my opinion not only had no incidence, but I have a charter right to my opinion. And so when I realized how high up on his values he was describing them as acceptable accepting trans women as women and so on, I decided to use my firing time to explain my views, because being called transphobic is starting to be really terrible. Like, I've had it. So I said, well, if this is the situation, well, I'm going to tell you what I defend against trans people. I'm for women's rights. And at the moment, it feels like we have inadequation between sex-based protected characteristic and a newly protected gender characteristic, which are incompatible. Because if you change the definition of women, also, like, as a radical feminist, survivor of the sex industry, my entire analysis on what the sex industry is and does is sex-based. Reading Andrea Dworkian saved my life, because as a survivor, I did not come to feminists out of the intellectual luxury of finding it, oh, it's cool, I'm gonna be a feminist. No, we come at it from an urgency of understanding and of finding a way to not feel so guilty about, because on one hand, you have society telling you you've made bad choices. And when you used to hold work discourse while you were in the industry, when you get out, that discourse has no explanation. Nothing is trauma informed about it. Nothing will tell you why you feel the way you feel, why you have all these physical symptoms. And then you feel guilt towards that ideology of sex work is because I'm binging me for free anyway, so at least now and all the reasoning that women in the industry need to tell themselves in order to survive, because nobody likes to feel like a victim. And so when, after having exited the sex industry, and I needed to up in a feminist agency that understood that I needed to understand and unpack in order to heal. And so my counselor at the time, it's back 7 or 8 years ago, introduced me to radical feminist analysis. And I mean, the hair on my raising, just shattering when you have such a large system, a systemic need above you to sacrifice women to the sex industry. So it was groundbreaking for me to have this understanding of how we had such a thing as a sex class oppressing another sex class. An entire understanding in my approach to helping women came from that understanding. And now you're removing me the need to understand the world as different opposing sex classes. And you're telling me that we being a woman is a feeling or a costume. And I know that we sound terribly mean when we say that, but I'm going to give you an example. I'm speaking with another counselor recently, and she tells me, well, in the shelter where I work, we allow boys to stay with their mother up until they're 13, but after 13, they become men. So she's telling me that, and at the same time, trans women are women. So I'm like, so you'll have grown ass men at your shelter because they say they feel like a woman. So you are really telling me that woman is a feeling to you. But yeah, the 14-year-old boy, no, he's becoming a man. So this could be threatening to the women at the shelter. Are you serious? It's so surreal. So the biggest feeling I have from this gender ideology madness is that it's like a giant gaslighting. I feel everywhere like we're taking away my tools to analyze the situation. We're not helping me. We're not letting me name the problem and explain to women their own oppression. Not all women have their period. It's so, but within community services, it's even worse. Women who are using the services, if they complain that they're housed with a man or be a man, they get completely gaslit. So it's like, it is obvious to us who are on the inside and who suffer this ideology that it's just a rebranding. I was on an online training recently. Out of 34 attendees for the class, 8 people had their pronoun. It's surreal. Like most of the people opposing us gender, so flabbergasting to me that so on board with that. So back to my firing story. I explained to the person firing me my political position, and then I try to go into accommodations. I tell him, well, I'm absolutely ready to not talk about any activism at work. Like I can avoid all these topics, even though, when you're working in a warehouse, you're speaking about anything. You're like, who are you going to vote? Are you going to you're having political conversation because you're just working at one topic you're not allowed to talk about to keep your job. I would have caved in, and I'm not at work to be an activist, but none of my proposed accommodation made sense to him. For him, I was a threat from the way I think, because the way I think is trans exclusive. And suddenly, basically, you're telling me, and also during the time I was at the resource, I personally saw 3 trans people and 1 full male body being housed there. So on a resource that will say in their annual report that they need to refuse 10 to 12 women a day, so many requests they have for housing. Within the, I don't know how many amount of women they can house at the time, but within that, there was sometimes 1, even 2 trans people. I don't know. I'm not going to be able to go into all the details I would like to, but like if people are believing that women is something you add onto yourself or subtract onto yourself, and that making all these very aesthetic accommodations make you a woman, and behaving in a very stereotypical way makes you a woman, and like, it's exhausting. I don't know. I'm sorry, I'm out of word right now. It's just when you're on the ground living it, it's absolutely surreal. And so I explained my views. I tried to stay very polite and diplomatic. I offered accommodations to be able to keep my job. And he just told me, no, your values are incompatible with our association. And because your values seems to be very firmly held and you're not going to change about them, then therefore you're not in the right place here. And so I was fired like that. And then they went on to try to make it seem like I had left on my own, out of my own accord. But I was saying, no, you put me in front of a non-choice. The non-choice was you either think like us if you want to stay, or because your views are too strongly held, therefore you don't fit. So I was in front of a non-choice. They didn't offer me any ways to stay. And so he phrased it like, because your values are so held strongly, you will agree that you're not in your place here. To which I replied, well, I guess, like, what do you want me to do? And then the whole firing felt violent in an HR way, like as in like you can't go back to your locker, you cannot go back to say goodbye to your colleagues, we forbid you from entering into contact with your manager, like just like basically that whole part of your life stops existing. And then 2 weeks after, COVID lockdown. So the depression it put me through was really profound, because I was like, I am exactly the kind of woman who's supposed to give back and help, and these resources are made, technically speaking, for women like me, and now this gender ideology has taken over everything, and most people comply with it because they don't want to be the bad transphobe person that gets excluded. It's extremely exhausting. So that's what launched me into having to kind of take action. So at first I was wondering, what can I do with that? Where can I take this to get legal advice? And after receiving several different advices, I had to settle on small claims courts, because basically I had not worked there long enough to be eligible to the free defense offered by labor law. Because I'd only worked there 9 months, and I would have needed to have worked there 2 years to be defended by labor court. Then I tried the Human Rights Commission. Initially, they received my complaint, the Human Rights Commission, okay? They received my complaint and deemed it as legitimate, and that it was part of the umbrella of political discrimination. But then a year after, they flipped. They said, your complaint is irreceivable, because, and the way they voiced it is like, because community agencies are allowed to discriminate based on certain criteria. And I'm like, yes, as in if you're in a woman resource, they are allowed to only hire female staffers, like stuff like that. There are clauses that allow an agency to kind of do a positive discrimination for the meaning of their work. But this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about my views are considered transphobic, and therefore, because now they've decided to open up the description of women as including trans people. I never say trans women. They're not a kind of women. They are a kind of gender non-conforming male. So I don't get into that. I try to be very careful with words, because words carry meaning and they shape the ideas that people have access to. So now I'm at the point of I am waiting for my court date. It should be in about 2.5 years. The position of my ex-employer has been from the start that they refuse to negotiate. They will not settle out of court. And I'm claiming damages, which according to jurisprudence, I'm entitled to as per cases of political discrimination. And there's an aggravating factor to the fact that it was deliberate of them to do that. It's not an accident. They said they literally did that to me. So I'm entitled to claim a certain amount. It is known that when you're in small claims court, you're claiming an amount that is below $15,000. So this is how vague I can tell you about my situation. I'm claiming damages to them. Their position is firmly, they deny any wrongdoing. So it's going to be settled in 2.5 years in court. Then I'm still wondering what to do about the Human Rights Commission, because the fact that they chickened out on my claim and preferred to defend the protected characteristic of gender ideology and the right of my employer to exclude me because I don't abide to gender ideology. I'm trying to get legal advice and to see if there is a French-Canadian lawyer who would be courageous enough to maybe take on the Human Rights Commission. Because if we let them do that, they are picking and choosing whichever case they want to defend. And at the moment, we've seen with the case of Jessica Yaniv that they are really inclined to want to defend the trans ideology at the expense of women's sex-specific rights. So this is it's very exhausting, actually. And I'm not even like, I mean, my case is nothing compared to some people who go on to like heavy court case that will take 5 to 6 years to like settle. So, and it's already exhausting at my level. And it's you have to like, it's a language. It's like, to decide to pursue these kinds of cases is difficult. You need a lot of help, a lot of support. You need to fundraise for your legal expenses. So that's what I've been doing. I've been just not accepting that this was done to me. And I'm obviously doing it to get the damages for myself, because as a survivor, I don't accept it. Like, I'm like, how dare you do this to me? But also to try to create some precedent so that other women eventually will be like, well, you know, you cannot fire me for that. And here's an example that went to court. Because if none of us take these cases to court, then nothing's going to happen in jurisprudence. So that's the situation.